All right, what's going on, everybody? Good morning. Um, well, hot topic series that's been on ESPN that I know everyone's been watching. I know I've been watching it. It's been getting a ton of ratings, and not only that, it's been getting a ton of attention. A lot of people talking about various topics out of this series, and this is the Last Dance, which is basically a documentary about Michael Jordan and his basketball career. And one of the biggest things that has been talked about in regards to this series is the feud between the Chicago Bulls and the Detroit Pistons. And above all that, not only just that, but the feud with Michael Jordan and Isaiah Thomas. And Michael Jordan being blamed for Isaiah Thomas not being put on that dream team. Everyone's going to have their opinion on it. Now, there's been a lot of bad blood between the Detroit Pistons and the Chicago Bulls that a lot of players probably still share today. Michael Jordan still hasn't gotten over this grudge that he's held against Isaiah Thomas. Isaiah Thomas has said that he regrets walking off the court after that playoff series, the first time that the Bulls beat them finally, and he says he regrets that. And if he had it all to do over again, he would have did it differently. But that still isn't good enough for Jordan. Jordan doesn't care because he says that he's just saying that now after the fact. After that, he has to deal with the repercussions of his actions, and I get that. But another big topic is Isaiah being left off that 1992 Dream Team, the first time that the NBA players were allowed to go to the Olympics and play against other countries in Olympic basketball. So John Stockton, another great point guard, Hall of Fame point guard, was put on that team instead of Isaiah Thomas. And the argument is that Isaiah Thomas is a way better player than John Stockton. If you based it basically on talent, then there's no way you could have put John Stockton on that team over Isaiah Thomas. Now, we already know the personal issues because Isaiah had a lot of personal issues with numerous people on that team. A lot of people on that team did not like him, and they didn't want to play with him. And there would have been friction probably on and off the court and in the locker room. There's no question about that. I think it's pretty safe to say that that would have been an issue. But here's the thing, guys. Max Kellerman made a great point because Magic Johnson was on First Take the other day, and he was talking about Isaiah Thomas being snubbed from that 1992 Dream Team. And he explained the problems and why it happened that way. A lot of it was just personal stuff. But then he said if it was based on just ability, there's no way that you can compare John Stockton to Isaiah Thomas. He said Isaiah Thomas was able to score 25 points in one quarter in a playoff game, or I think it was the finals against him. He was able to score 25 points and just take over that game. And he said John Stockton never would have been able to do that. And that's a fair point. That's a fair point. But is that the job of a point guard, to be a scorer? Because you can argue that Isaiah Thomas is maybe the second best point guard of all time, or at least in the top three. And there's no question about it. If you looked at raw talent and raw ability and all-around athleticism, then yeah, Isaiah Thomas was probably, not even probably, he was, I think, unequivocally overall a more talented player than John Stockton. But when you put a basketball team together, it's not always about who's more talented in terms of like all-around ability. Is Isaiah Thomas really head and shoulders above John Stockton when it comes to playing the position of point guard? Because I stress, what's a point guard supposed to do? He's supposed to be the playmaker. He's supposed to distribute. And Max Kellerman made a great point. When Magic Johnson said that John Stockton couldn't take over a game like Isaiah Thomas could. He couldn't score 25 points in one quarter like Isaiah Thomas did. Okay, but is that what was needed on that dream team? Because you already had plenty of players on that dream team that could have already done those things and have done those things throughout the course of their career. You already had people that could do that. You already had a ton of scorers there. You already had a ton of guys who could take over games. What you needed is a guy who could manage all those egos and distribute the ball to all those egos and make those guys look as good as possible. Now, would Isaiah Thomas have been able to do that better than John Stockton? Because let's look at John Stockton. He's the all-time NBA assist leader. And he has led the league in assist 9 times. He's won 9 assist titles in the NBA, more than anybody. Okay? And another stat that is overlooked by John Stockton is, let me just look at one of the stats here that stood out to me. Out of all the guards, point guards on the list with the assists, they're showing another stat, which is steals. He had 3,265 steals in his career too, which was more than Magic Johnson, which was more than Isaiah Thomas, which is more than everybody. Now let's look at who's the all-time leading steals person in the NBA. Because in point guards, I think John Stockton has the most steals out of all the point guards in the NBA. Okay, so all-time leading steals NBA. I'm just curious to see all-time leading steals. Okay, John Stockton is okay for steals. John Stockton is the NBA leader in steals, ahead of Jason Kidd and Michael Jordan. So that's another great stat that John Stockton had. Let me let Callie King in. And here's another thing that people forget. I'm going to get to you in a second, my man. Just let me, Brian. Let me just finish this point, and I'm going to kick it over to you.
Okay, do your thing.
Yeah. So another thing that people don't realize is Isaiah Thomas only had, he just came off wrist surgery. And you could argue at the time of the Dream Team that John Stockton was probably better physically. He was more physically fit. He didn't have many injuries, whereas Isaiah Thomas had some issues with his wrist. I think he had some issues with his Achilles as well. And he retired 2 years after that Dream Team played in the Olympics. So you can argue that John Stockton was healthier and he was more fit. So Max Kellerman made a great point. Like I said, going back to what he said, was Isaiah Thomas needed in the fashion that Magic described him in? Did they need another guy to take over a game? Did they need another guy who could score a lot of points? They already had the scorers. So what they needed was a guy who could direct all those stars and make those stars look the best they could and just be a complement to all those stars. So it's not crazy to say that John Stockton's name can't be mentioned in the same breath as Isaiah Thomas. Because when you look at a pure point guard position, okay, John Stockton, his job was to distribute the ball, be a playmaker, and play hard defense. So did Isaiah Thomas do those things better than him? Was he a better ball distributor? Okay, was he a better defender? Because the stats don't show that. So taking all of the personality flaws and a lot of the tension that Isaiah had with the rest of the Dream Team, is it ridiculous to say that John Stockton, based off of skill, based off of ability, or just based off of merit in terms of his skills, that it's ridiculous to put him on over Isaiah Thomas? because Max Kellerman said you could make an argument that he could be there just as well as Isaiah Thomas. You got the guy who's the all-time leading assist leader, and you got the guy who's the all-time leader in steals. Okay, and you got a guy who was healthier at the time and who was still in his prime, where you had another guy who was not in his prime, who retired 2 years later. So you could argue that at that time, John Stockton was a better fit for the team than Isaiah Thomas was. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that Isaiah Thomas all around had more ability than John Stockton, and you could argue that was probably a better athlete all around, and was a proven winner because he did win 2 titles and John Stockton did not win 2 titles. But again, John Stockton didn't have the team that Isaiah Thomas had. Outside of Karl Malone, he didn't have a great supporting cast on that Utah Jazz team. He had a lot of good players, but outside of Karl Malone and himself, those 2 were the only Hall of Fame players on that squad. Whereas if you look at the Pistons, you could argue that Rodman's in the Hall of Fame. Okay, Isaiah Thomas is in the Hall of Fame. Bill Lambert is going to be in the Hall of Fame. All those guys there. Joe Dumars. He had a solid squad, and he had a strong bench. Jazz didn't have that same squad. So John Stockton got a lot out of little, got a lot out of a squad that just wasn't as good as those other teams, like the Bulls and the Pistons and even the Phoenix Suns. They had a tight squad too when they were playing. They had Kevin Johnson, they had Barkley, they had Dan Marley. So I think an argument can be made that Isaiah wasn't just off that team because of the personality flaws and the clashes, but maybe John Stockton just earned that spot on merit, on ability. John Stockton, you can make an argument that John Stockton, in terms of playing the point guard position, was just as good as Isaiah Thomas, and in some respects, maybe even slightly better. Go ahead, Callie. I'm going to let you give your take on this and tell me if I'm off base here and if I'm talking crazy.
Hey, what's going on? Top of the morning, man. Top of the morning.
Then what's happening?
Hey, I got to agree with a lot of the stuff that you were saying, with the whole, because, Isaiah Thomas retired early. I think,
Yep.
What did he retire at, 32?
Yep.
Yeah, he retired way early, and it's got a lot to do with all that wear and tear that he went through in his career. But the one thing that I gotta give to as far as them as players, the one thing I gotta give to Isaiah Thomas is those rings. You know what I'm saying? He won some rings. John Stockton didn't win rings. And even though you say that they had a good squad, Detroit Pistons, Isaiah Thomas made them good. He was the leader of that. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. He was the leader, man. He was an ambassador. And he was a little guy, just like John Stockton. He was just, we could say he was more tougher, which resulted in all that wear and tear. He was rough and tough. He was dirty. He did what he had to do, but he made them Pistons the way that, the culture, the winning culture that they had, but John Stockton is tough, and he's a good player, and he's not too far behind Isaiah Thomas, besides some differences with him having the rings. But, the thing with John Stockton, I ain't going to lie to you, that Utah Jazz team was tough, man. They just couldn't get past Jordan. You know what I'm saying? So it's not like Stockton never had a good team. He also led a team. The only takeaway, he ran into Jordan. You know what I'm saying? But Jordan had to get through Isaiah Thomas and the Detroit Pistons to even win a ring. I mean, it's just a big difference, especially if you're using Michael Jordan, because Michael Jordan went right through the Utah Jazz, but he had to get through the Detroit Pistons in order to win a ring. So comparing John Stockton and Isaiah Thomas as far as their career, I might have to give a slight edge to Isaiah Thomas. However, during that time, John Stockton, he was right for the position because of the fact that Isaiah Thomas had probably a bunch of lingering injuries. Just simple as that. You know, I think
At,
it's as simple as that.
at that time, could you make an argument that in 1992, John Stockton was a better player than Isaiah Thomas? In 1992, I don't think you can even make
Definitely,
an argument career-wise. I think Isaiah had a better career because he was on even in college. Like didn't they win in college when he
he
was
was
on
a
Indiana?
baller.
In college, he won in Indiana too. Didn't they win a national championship when he was on in Indiana as well?
Yeah, yeah.
So he's got 2 rings in the NBA. NBA. Did John Stockton MVP? Let's see if did John Stockton ever win a league MVP? I don't remember that. John Stockton. Let me look at that up. If he ever won a
He had
league MVP.
he had to.
If he won the league, John Stockton league MVP. He was a first round draft. He was in the first round. He was a 16th round. Did John Stockton ever win an MVP? He never won an MVP. Okay.
Oh, he didn't.
He's still he was on the 50 best players list. Okay. And he averaged, this is crazy. He averaged 10.5 assists per game.
Yeah, John Stockton he was a baller, man. He was a baller. That's why you can only give a slight edge to Isaiah Thomas, because John Stockton, and then on top of that, he had a longer career, if I'm not mistaken, than
much longer
than Isaiah Thomas. So he had the ability to rack up his stats. You know what I'm saying? But I think around that time, man, I really do. Like you said, the thing is, Isaiah Thomas was, as far as, his ability and everything that they were saying that he could do around that time, he was just, he had all them lingering injuries. You know what I'm saying? And John Stockton, he was obviously fresher. He had a longer career. You know what I'm saying? So, I think John Stockton deserved that position, man, around that time, even though it might have been good, if they would have put Isaiah Thomas on that team and maybe they could have squashed all their beefs, and because there was turmoil during them times, son. They was, man, I can't believe that the beef they had even to this day, man. It's just so crazy, man. It's so crazy.
Yeah, it's nuts how they still have that beef like that, man.
Yeah, and all that did was just add fuel to the fire with him not playing on the team. One thing about Isaiah Thomas, maybe they should have just put him on there, but it's a coin flip between John Stockton and Isaiah Thomas, because maybe they could have squash their beef if he would have been on that dream team. That was the first one that they had. Who knows, man? Because Isaiah Thomas felt some kind of way about it all these years too.
Yeah.
It's just a lingering beef going on with that whole scenario. But it's coming to the light.
So Isaiah Thomas, here's his accomplishments as a player. He's a 2-time NBA champion. He's an NBA Finals MVP in 1990. He is a 12-time NBA All-Star, 2-time NBA All-Star Game MVP, and 3-time NBA All-Star First Team, 2nd All-NBA Second Team, and NBA Rookie First Team. And okay, what else did he do? So basically that's it. That he has a lot of accomplishments as a player.
Yeah.
When
I was young,
he was the NBA assist leader in 1985. So he was only the assist leader one time. Okay.
Yeah.
He's in the NBA's 50 greatest players. He's an NCAA champion 1981, NCAA Final Four most outstanding player 1981. He's an All-American 1981, USA Basketball Male Athlete of the Year 1980, McDonald's High School Classic. So he's got a ton of accomplishments. But So does John Stockton, but I think Isaiah Thomas is a more accomplished player in terms of just things that he's done throughout the course of his career. But
Yeah.
John Stockton was very consistent. Like after 87, Isaiah Thomas just wasn't the same. That's when his body started breaking down on him.
Breaking
Whereas
down. Yeah.
John Stockton was solid for like a good 15 to 16 years. He retired. He played 19 years in the NBA. That's a long freaking career, dude.
Yeah. I mean, to be honest with you, I'll be honest. I don't even remember John Stockton going through injuries like that.
No,
You
he
know.
was a tough guy, man.
Yeah, it's just the way he played was. They had two different types of styles, you know, how they played, and John Stockton was just mostly off the pick and roll, and you know, he was smart. He had a high basketball IQ, man.
Yeah.
High basketball IQ, you
So
know.
so let's look at John Stockton's career highlights and awards. So he was a 10-time All-Star. He was an NBA All-Star Game MVP in 1993, two-time All-NBA First Team, six-time All-NBA Second Team, third-time All-NBA Third Team, three-time, five-time NBA Defensive Second Team, nine-time NBA Assist Leader. Okay, two-time NBA Steals Leader. Okay, he's on the 50 greatest players. He was a WCC Player of the Year, and he's a two first-time All WCC, 1983 and 1984. Okay, so yeah, I mean this guy had some good stats. Like if you look at his stats, I think he has better all-around stats than Isaiah Thomas. Okay,
Yeah,
because he averaged 13.1 points per game, and he averaged 10.5 assists per game. And this is a great stat right here: 2.2 steals per game. Let's look at Isaiah Thomas's career stats. Let me see what his career stats are, and see. Let's see how they stack up. Because these guys are the way people talk. Like Isaiah Thomas is like a way better player than John Stockton, and I agree with Max Kellerman on his assessment. I think these guys are comparable, man. They're comparable.
but let me ask you this one question because I'll be asking this about Michael Jordan when people have a debate about Michael Jordan and LeBron James. I'll be like, let me ask you one question.
Yeah.
Who do you think would have won a one-on-one game between John Stockton and Isaiah Thomas? Let's say, let's go back some years, maybe even 19. Let's say that year, 1992
Isaiah
or
Thomas.
19. Isaiah Thomas.
Yeah. I think Isaiah Thomas would win.
That you think that have anything to do with any type of decision on? Okay, you know.
Well, I think if I when I first used to talk about this whole thing, I was like in that camp, like, yeah, Isaiah Thomas definitely should have been there over John Stockton. But then when I really look at it, when I take the nostalgia away from it, right? When I just take away the fact that he's Isaiah Thomas and John Stockton is John Stockton. Because I remember growing up watching the NBA and seeing how Isaiah Thomas would take over a game, and it was amazing to see that little guy just take it to the hoop, take it to the hoop against those big guys and still be able to score and beat guys off the dribble and hit big shots and stuff like that. It was so great to see that. But then when I just look at what the point guard position really is, and you could argue that John Stockton is a better pure point guard than Isaiah Thomas. Now, Isaiah Thomas, to his credit, he averaged a lot of assists per game too. Don't get me wrong. But my question is, would his ego get in the way on that dream team? Would he feel like he would have to outdo those other guys? And would he take more shots than he needed to take just to prove a point? Whereas John Stockton, we know he has his ego in check. He's thinking pass first. You got it when you got a point guard playing with great players. You want to have a guy whose mentality is pass first. Now, would Isaiah Thomas's mentality have been pass first on that 1992 Dream Team? I don't know, because it wasn't always pass first when he played.
You're
And this
making
is taking nothing.
good points. Good point.
And this is taking nothing away from Isaiah Thomas, to be perfectly honest with you.
Those are good points.
So, but here's the thing: like Isaiah Thomas averaged 19.2 points per game. That's a lot of points for a point guard. That's a lot of points for a point guard. He actually averaged 3.6 rebounds and 9.3 assists.
Yeah. I mean, they was different. That's why I say they had different styles. It's kind of like who was a better point guard between Allen Iverson and John Stockton. Now, we know Allen Iverson was not no point guard. You know what I'm saying? He was more like a shooting guard, but that was his position was point guard. So they just had different styles, man. They had different styles, but you know, what you're saying definitely with the assist check, you know, that's all point guard stuff right there. You know, John Stockton had a high point guard, you know, and good court vision, you know, IQ.
Yeah. Let's look at John Stockton's career stats as well. So these numbers are comparable, man. They're comparable. Let's look at John Stockton career stats. I want to see how many okay. So these stats are really comparable. The only thing that kind of stands out a little bit is Isaiah Thomas averaged 6 more points a game than John Stockton. Let me see. They averaged about the same amount of rebounds. Let me see with Isaiah Thomas. Okay. So let's look at Isaiah Thomas stats. Detroit Piston career stats. Okay, so yeah, so Isaiah Thomas averaged like one more rebound a game, 6 more points, and John Stockton averaged almost like 1.2 more, like almost 2 assists more a game. So the stats are really comparable. And then John Stockton averaged like a steal and a half more a game, basically. So the only thing that really stands out here that's kind of separates Isaiah Thomas from John Stockton is his scoring ability.
Yeah.
But again, like how important.
But you said who did you say? You said Max Kellerman. He said what? He said that Isaiah Thomas was just way ahead of John Stockton.
No. Magic Johnson said that Isaiah Thomas was a better player than John Stockton, and he said Isaiah Thomas scored 25 points in one quarter in a finals game against him, and he said that John Stockton never would have been able to do that. And Max Kellerman said, "Well, you know, when you compare both of these guys, it's like." It's like a coin flip, basically. He said in terms of ability, and Magic and Stephen A. Smith just said there's no way you can compare John Stockton to Isaiah Thomas, and you really can. Max Kellerman made some great points. He's like, do you really need a guy to score 25 points? Did you need that type of guy on the dream team at that time when you already had other guys that could do that? Like I already said, and I agree with them on that point. And number two, when you look at their stats, John Stockton was better at with assists, better at steals, and the only difference was that Isaiah Thomas was averaged 6 more points a game than John Stockton. But
Right.
but when you look at a point guard, are you looking at a point guard who's going to score for you? No, you want a guy who can distribute. And you can argue that John Stockton is a better distributor, a better playmaker than Isaiah Thomas. And that team needed a playmaker. When you have all those stars, you need a guy who can give the ball to those guys at the right time, at the right place, and the way they want it. The way they want the ball to be received. Now, obviously, Isaiah Thomas can distribute, but if you want to make an argument and based off of stats, John Stockton was better at it. He was a
Yeah.
better pure point guard than Isaiah Thomas in terms of distributing the ball.
Right. Right.
You know?
I just think it have a lot to do with just the timing of it. You know what I'm saying? Like I said, it has something to do with the beef, between Michael Jordan and Chicago Bulls and Detroit, just Detroit in general, man. We can't say it didn't have nothing to do with that. And it was just completely like, okay, John Stockton, we're going to give it to you. No, it had to have something to do with some beef because Isaiah Thomas did deserve to be on that team. And it don't have to do with that time. It's just the work he put in, into the NBA. He won rings. You know what I'm saying? He won rings. And that's a big edge when it comes to who's better. It's like when you ask who's better, he do have rings. It's just like if you compare Kobe and Allen Iverson around they played around the same time. They played against each other. I love both of them, but hey, Kobe's my dude. You know what I'm saying? He got rings. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But they was both good though. You know what I'm saying? But it's a reason why Isaiah Thomas led a team to get rings is what I'm saying. You know what I'm saying? He led a team, to them rings. But that time, like I said, Isaiah Thomas' body was breaking down, and it has something to do with that beef. We got to be honest. It was that beef, man. That's it.
But I guess my whole point about this today, making this video, is like when you take the beef away, it's not like cut and dry that Isaiah Thomas should have made it over John Stockton. Now, arguably, if they didn't have the beef, they probably would have brought both of them on and probably dropped Christian Laettner. There was no reason Christian Laettner should have been on that team. I mean, no disrespect to him, but they could have dropped him and had both Isaiah and John Stockton on that team.
Right.
If both of those guys were competing for a spot, you can make an argument for John Stockton. That's my whole point today. Is Max Kellerman said you could make an argument for John Stockton. No one seems to think that. No one seems to believe that. And I think you can make an argument that John Stockton could be taken over Isaiah Thomas and to build a team.
Right.
That's all. Like these guys are, like Max said, these guys are closely comparable. And no one seems to believe that. And I guess that's just my argument. I agree with Max. Max actually made some good points. It made me think twice about myself just automatically saying that Isaiah Thomas should be over John Stockton unequivocally without question. So I think he made a great point. And I totally agree with him when you look at the stats. And I know the game's not all about stats, but make no mistake about it. That Utah Jazz team how many times did that Utah Jazz team go to the finals? Didn't they go to the finals like twice?
Yeah, twice.
Yeah, twice. So that they just ran into Jordan. And at that time, no one was beating Jordan. At that time, no one was beating Jordan.
Yeah. They beat my Lakers. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, they
beat my Lakers, man.
So it wasn't like John Stockton couldn't win. He just couldn't win, he just couldn't win the finals.
Right. But I agree, man. I agree with what you're saying. I think there is a legit case for John Stockton. really, really honestly believe that still, man, that beef really influenced him not being on that team. And that's the whole issue. That really, that's the whole issue is why didn't Isaiah Thomas play on that dream team, and it's that beef. It has something to do with that beef, and that's the issue of it.
Well, let me ask you a question. If I asked you today, if I asked you today that, okay, we can go back in time and we can jump into a time machine right now, and you and I are going to be the general manager of that team, and we have a decision to make, John Stockton or Isaiah Thomas, who, based off of everything that I just said and based off of your opinion, who would you have put on that team at that particular time in 1992? If you had to pick one. And everybody in the chat, you can chime in on this.
Oh, I'm gonna have to say Isaiah Thomas.
Okay.
I'm gonna have to say Thomas, just because of the fact that I want them to be in that type of situation, because they uncomfortable around each other. They got beef. I don't want them to be friendly. You guys pray, practice and let's work this beef out. You know what I'm saying? Because you got to work as a team, because sometimes that's a positive thing to do that. You know what I'm saying? So I would have probably just picked them just because of that main issue, because we know the issue was the beef. You know what I'm saying? It was the beef. Michael Jordan can sit up there and say, I didn't have nothing to do with it. I don't believe it. You know what I'm saying? Him and Scottie Pippen, they had something to do with it.
Well, Larry didn't like Isaiah Thomas either, because of what was said about, him just being another white player. That was an Isaiah Thomas quote about Larry Bird. Karl Malone didn't like Isaiah Thomas. So I don't even think Drexler liked him. Like I think the only person on that team that actually liked Isaiah Thomas at that time was probably Charles Barkley.
What though? Hey, you know what? Let me take that back, because I mean, damn, that's a problem. That's a problem if just you doing something wrong.
Isaiah Thomas, I have tons of respect for the guy, but I gotta say one thing. He had, I think he had.
He was dirty.
I think he had ego problems too. I think he had some ego problems. Like
he had little man syndrome.
When you look at Bird and Magic, right? They had no problem passing the torch to Jordan. They were so gracious in doing so. They put their egos aside and they said, this guy's the best player we've ever seen. Okay. Now Isaiah Thomas comes out and says, "Oh, Jordan's probably the fourth or fifth best player I ever played against." Do you think he means that, or you think that's personal? Now, let's be real.
That's personal.
So Isaiah Thomas couldn't check his emotions.
Yeah.
Okay. And a lot of problems that he had to deal with in his career. And granted, he's accomplished a shit ton. Don't get me wrong. I can't take nothing away from the guy. But everybody got demons. Even Jordan got demons. But Jordan came, was able to control his demons. He was able to understand and accept who he was as a man, and he could live with himself. Isaiah Thomas, when you're 60 years old and you're going back and saying, I wish I did this different, I wish I did that different. That's fine. We all have second thoughts about what we could have done better in our lives. But if Isaiah Thomas held a grudge that had issues with Magic Johnson for forever, and only a couple years ago did they just squash their beef, right? And that's because Magic Johnson reached out to him. So, Isaiah Thomas needs to look inside himself, and as great as a human being as he is, he's a brilliant man too. He's a brilliant man. He's got a master's degree. He's a brilliant man. No question about it. He's a brilliant basketball player. He's a phenomenal basketball player. But one character flaw he has is I think his ego and and his emotions sometimes control him and take over and make him do things that he probably shouldn't do, make him do and say things he probably shouldn't do or say. And then he has to go back and walk the statements back and backtrack what he did wrong. And I think that, because of that, I think that has affected him in his career. And what he said about Magic Johnson, like just coming out and saying something like that publicly about Magic Johnson, and what he said about Larry Bird, and I don't think he should be framed as the bad guy. But now but I don't think he should be framed as the victim either, because everything that happened to him was his fault. And this is what I love Magic Johnson, because Magic Johnson is the nicest guy in the world. And you get the sense when you hear Magic Johnson talk, he doesn't want to say anything negative about anybody.
Nobody.
But he has a way of criticizing people, but not putting them down. He could tell you about yourself in a realistic way, but without kicking sand in your face. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So even he said, Isaiah and I have talked, and I told him, the things that happened and why he was off that dream team and this and that, things he said or whatever. And he said it in a nice way, but he said it in a real way where he wasn't going to pull any punches about it. So that's the thing. Like Magic Johnson to this day comes out and says, well, Isaiah had a deal with the repercussions of his actions, and he knows that it was his fault.
Right, because like I said, we know that it was these beefs that was going on, and it's like he basically generated all of them. You know what I'm saying? Like, you're the cause of them. I mean, it's they had to do what they had to do to win and be competitive, but it still rubbed everybody the wrong way. And if that was the cause and the effect of him not being on the team, because he definitely was worthy. We can't say he wasn't worthy of being on that team. Yeah, you should have been on the team, but
Stockton was worthy too, though.
Yeah, Stockton was worthy too, but I'm saying we can't say he wasn't. But maybe those beefs just made him ineligible. Shit. You know what I'm saying?
Here's my problem, Brian, and I'm just gonna say this. I think those beefs kind of overshadowed how good John Stockton was. Like, everyone's saying, well, the only reason why Isaiah Thomas left off that team because of the beefs. And obviously that was a huge part of it, don't get me wrong. But in saying that, you're almost saying to John Stockton could be sitting here listening to this and saying, oh, well, so the only reason why I'm here is because no one liked this guy. I didn't get here on my own accord. I didn't get here based off of my own ability. My stats, you put my numbers up against this guy's numbers, I'm right there with this guy. And in two categories, I'm better than him. You know what I'm saying? So I don't want, and I don't think that Stockton's ability should be overshadowed, and his deservingness to be on this team should be overshadowed by the beef that Isaiah Thomas had with many players on that team is what I'm trying to say. If that makes any sense.
Right. But I mean, the beef is what overshadowed it, though. That's why the dude didn't make it. He shot himself in the foot, but it was still his doing, you know what I'm saying? Yeah. But, I give John Stockton all the credit in the world, but if John Stockton was sitting here right now, I'd be like, hold on, man. You still didn't get no rings, Stockton. He got rings, and it's about what he did. People knew about what Isaiah Thomas did before them years. John Stockton was on the rise, around that time he was growing, you know what I'm saying, as far as his stats and everything like that, you know what I'm saying? But I don't know, man. I mean, Isaiah Thomas won rings, and that's a big difference right there. He won rings, and as far as
go ahead.
What you say? Sorry. Oh no, go ahead.
No, finish. You finish yours, and I'll wait for you. Go ahead.
I was just saying, he just did it to himself, man. Isaiah Thomas, he did it to himself, man. You know what
Yeah,
I'm saying? And
yeah.
I mean, not saying that John Stockton was number two, but Isaiah Thomas was ahead of him. You know what I'm saying? I mean, as far as them, who's a better player, I mean, we gotta admit Isaiah Thomas is a slightly better player. He won
Yeah,
rings.
he's an overall. There's no question about it. He's an overall more talented player
Yeah. But
than
that
John
don't
Stockton.
matter if nobody wants to play with you. That's what I'm saying. It don't matter if nobody wants to play with them dudes. Just we gotta tell the truth, man. Nobody wanted to play with them.
But you could argue John Stockton was a better fit on that team because of the fact that he thought pass first, shoot second. He never put himself in a position where he was going to take over a game by scoring. He was going to take over a game by hard defense and transition, number one, and by distributing the ball. So
Mm-hmm.
he was always going to try and make everyone else look good. Was Isaiah Thomas going to do that? Would his ego have allowed him to do that? Just because both guys are very good players. They're great players. They're Hall of
Mm-hmm.
Fame players. They're top 50 best NBA players of all time. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
they belong to be. They deserve to be mentioned in the same sentence of each other. But was John Stockton a better fit for that team based off of his style of play as opposed to Isaiah Thomas's style of play? Because Isaiah Thomas's ego, history has shown us that he's had an ego problem. He couldn't even pass the torch to the Bulls. He couldn't pass the torch to Jordan. Bird and Magic showed that they can pass
Mm-hmm.
the torch to Jordan. Jordan showed that he was willing to pass the torch to Kobe. He had no problem passing the torch to Kobe. And Kobe had no problem passing the torch to LeBron. You see what I'm saying? That's just the
Yeah.
natural way of things. And Isaiah Thomas still was not willing to say, hey, you know what? It's Jordan's time now. Bird and Magic had no problem saying this is Jordan's league now. Isaiah Thomas never was willing to do that. And because of that mentality, when he stepped on that court with the rest of those players, would his mentality have been, I'm going to try and make myself look good, and I'm going to show these guys that I'm just as good as them, and I'm just as dominant as them, okay? That I won titles just like they did. So I'm gonna kind of come here and try and show and prove and try to show these guys up. Or would he have done, or would you rather have John Stockton to say, you know what? These guys are great. My job is here to make them look even greater and be even greater. And I'm going to just basically defer to these guys and give them the ball and let them run the show. I'm going to be, in other words, I'm going to be in the background and put these guys in the forefront. And that's what
Right.
you needed. You needed a player that was going to do that on that team at that particular time. You see what I'm saying? You didn't need another scorer. Was Isaiah going to go in there and be the guy to distribute, or would his ego have taken over? And would he have tried to take over a game and not give those guys the ball? Or would those guys have given him the ball because of the animosity? Like when you have guys that have animosity towards each other, are they going to try and make each other look good, or because they have that animosity, are they going to try and make each other look bad? So I just think at that particular time, he was a bad fit for that team. Not only because of the personalities, but just because of his mentality. Because if he's not willing to pass the torch to the next generation, and he still wants to hold on to things, and even to this day, he still kind of downplays Jordan. There's not one person that played in the NBA in the 80s and the 90s and the early 90s and the early to mid 90s. There's not one person, there's not one NBA player that you can ask who the best player was. And every single person would say Michael Jordan, except for Isaiah Thomas. That tells you something. That tells you something, in my opinion.
He's still salty.
Still salty. And that
Still
would have
salty,
affected
man.
his
You know what? I
mentality.
got it. You
Me-
pretty much convinced me, man. I think they made a, fuck it, man. They made a
made the
good
right choice.
decision.
At
Yeah, they made the right choice. I mean, but I was agreeing the whole time with the whole thing because that's a big factor. That's like if somebody's good at a job, but it's hard to work with them. You know what I'm saying? It don't matter how good they are. It's like you hard to work with. It's hard to deal with you. And none of us want to deal with your ass, man. You need to get the fuck out of here.
And I'm
You fired, homie.
I'm gonna stand. I'm gonna stand on.
Yeah.
I'm gonna stand on my original point that his stats were good enough to justify him being there. It wasn't like he was.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Like people try to make it sound like the only reason why he was there is because Isaiah Thomas wasn't, and because of Isaiah Thomas's attitude and beefs with the other teammates. That's not the only reason why he was there. You can make an argument that he earned that spot on merit, on talent. You know what I'm saying?
Right. But let me ask you this: if let's say Isaiah Thomas did have the personality of John Stockton, then do you think he would have been there over John Stockton if he was the pass first?
Yeah,
he let go of his ego.
He would have been, but still, the reason why he would have been was because people would have looked back on what he's accomplished and stuff, and they would have compared what he did in his prime to what John Stockton did in his prime, whatever.
Right.
You could make an argument in 1992. You can make an argument that John Stockton
was right there.
He was right there with them. Maybe you can argue that he was slightly better at that particular time, based on where they both were in their careers. Like Isaiah Thomas, you can't disregard the fact that Isaiah Thomas retired 2 years after 1992. He retired in 1994.
Right.
Retired at 32 years old. Okay. You can't argue the fact that at that particular time that was not the best Isaiah Thomas. But what you can argue is that was probably the best John Stockton.
Right.
So would you take the best John Stockton over the not so best Isaiah Thomas at that particular time? That's what you have to understand.
Right. Because I mean, most of those guys around that time, to be honest with you, all of them was pretty much out of their prime. You know what I'm saying? They was all getting older.
Jordan wasn't.
Malone, Jordan wasn't though. No. Malone, Jordan, Charles Barkley.
Barkley wasn't.
But I'm saying Magic Johnson, Larry Bird. Those guys was, they was.
Magic,
I mean, maybe
Larry Bird, Drexler. And
Drexler.
Who else? I think Magic Bird and Drexler were probably out. You could say they were definitely out of their prime.
Right.
But those other guys were still formidable.
And John Stockton, was still on the rise. I mean, he was getting better and better and better. I mean, he did eventually take his team to the finals. You know what I'm saying? Him and Malone, both of them got there. So, I think they made a good decision getting Stockton, man. I don't have no problem with it. I don't think it's as dramatic as anybody say it is. And if it is, Isaiah Thomas is something that he probably brought on himself. I mean, because he still could have shook their hands regardless when he was walking off the court passing the torch. He should have passed the torch. You know what I'm saying? So that's why I say it's got a lot to do with your personality. It's a team sport.
Yeah.
It's a team sport. And at the time, I agree, maybe John Stockton had the personality as well as the stats, and that's important. You know what I'm saying?
I got you.
All
right, Bri.
Man.
I think we pretty much said all that could be said about this, man. But thanks for stepping in. I'm glad to hear your opinion on it.
We might have to do this more. We might have to do this more often on some NBA stuff, man. I love basketball. You feel me?
Yeah,
I love
yeah.
basketball.
We'll start doing this, man. Let me know
Yeah, yeah.
what topics you want to talk about, and we can start doing this, man. We could even talk about like go
Oh, we
talk
got to
about like
do. We got to eventually do the LeBron against Jordan debate. We
yeah,
got to have
yeah. We'll do that.
that.
We'll
you
do one
know.
on that. We can do one on that. We can do one on
Okay.
that.
Okay. Cool. Cool. Hey, thanks for having me
All
on.
right, man. Thanks for joining me. Take
All
care,
right. Have a
everybody.
good day, man.
Have a good day, everyone. Have a good day, Brian. Be good.
All right.